Hello, fellow humans. Welcome to Skeptic Haven. My name is Charlotte, and this is Women Atheists Unload.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take sh**. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take sh**. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take sh**. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it.
Hello and welcome. We are discussing today healthcare and patriarchy, or patriarchy and healthcare, however you want to put it. I am joined by Helen, who is a therapist in private practice in Virginia with experience as a social worker in emergency department and hospice. Jenna Miyu, also known as Black Female Atheist. She is an online content creator and co-owner of the YouTube channel, The Atheist Network Group, as goes by Tang. Real life is a licensed vocational nurse for 10 years, working in family practice, urology, and presently in health education, focused on bariatric surgery and weight management. And last but certainly not least, Raven May is a Two-Spirit member of Red Lake Nation of Ojibwe, an artist, activist who works in diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-racism. They use they, them pronouns and went viral on TikTok for their videos on the problems with healthcare in America for women and non-binary folk in America. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
I guess starting off, some of us have experience maybe on both sides of the, both experiencing and witnessing maybe some gender bias in our healthcare system. Do any of you want to speak to any of your personal experiences with
it? Hard to start, right?
Where do we
Sorry, I'm already kind of shuffling through my mind, just thinking of so many various things. I would say for myself, before becoming a nurse, as far as experiencing any kind of gender biases directly, I can't really recall or be too familiar with, just because I was so much younger. I started my nursing training when I was 22. So anything kind of that I can recall from memory, just experiencing some type of bias towards me or something that was done that wasn't or didn't feel adequate or right, I can't necessarily recall. A lot of my experience has either been more directly directed towards me as a nurse, or I have personally seen that has happened to other patients and or coworkers. I know for me personally, a lot stemming from when I used to be in the urology department for about a year and a half. I pretty much had my own nursing clinic. I did a whole bunch of minor procedures, such as Foley catheterization, various other things, providing treatment, things like that. Predominantly, a lot of the patients I would see were male. And a lot of my specialty doctors, I guess you could say, and surgeons were male as well. So it was challenging when being met with, yes, I guess I was trying to not classify it as harassment, but yes, it is harassment. It was harassment as far as how I would be approached by older white male patients, how I would often be spoke to by some of my MD colleagues that were older white men. And, I had to learn to find my voice in those instances without, going to dramatic detail. But it's very important to not only have advocacy for you as a patient and as an individual that is a professional person, but advocacy for yourself, being more spoken out as far as, this is how I should be approached. You are not more above me, or you should not talk more down on me just because you are an MD and I'm a nurse. We work together cohesively. And, striving and battling with that did ultimately bring me out of the department to where I am now, only because the job was, better for me. But, dealing and seeing those things opened my eyes to a lot that I did not personally think I would ever experience. But, it's not to say it's nothing anyone else has, or maybe even worse.
Yeah. Raven, I know you went viral for talking about some of your healthcare experiences. Is that anything that you would like to share or talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I went through, God, like a 6 to 7 year struggle to get a doctor to listen and
Hmm.
to listen to a lot of pain and issues I was having around my cycle and excessive bleeding and, other issues that were going on. And the dismissal for AFAB of assigned female at birth bodies. I'm gender fluid, but, I was viewed as femme in these spaces. So, was just horrendous, honestly. I remember visiting one male doctor and he's like, well, women just don't have a really good pain tolerance. So, you're probably overstating what this is like. And I thought, bro, we give birth. Like, I've had 3 kids. Like, I know, like, I got it. Like, I know what's up here. But just this idea that women or gender fluid people who present as femme don't have a good handle on what their symptoms are, don't have a good accuracy level for when they're measuring their own pain or when something is a problem. I almost had to become my own doctor in my own research. And the amount of persistence that it takes to get an accurate diagnosis when you're perceived as femme or are female in the healthcare industry is just really disheartening. By the time I went viral with a healthcare series on my TikTok called how to find it or finding a doctor that will listen. And it's basically like a 15-part series on me working my way through the years at all these doctors and as a larger bodied person, every time being told lose weight, lose weight, lose weight as the go-to answer. Or, this is how it is for women, so you just need to deal with it. Once I finally had a family nurse practitioner listen to me, get me in for an ultrasound, I had my hysterectomy within 3 months. They found out what was going on. They found out, like, there's not a way to fix this. Like, we got to do this. And that changed my quality of life so dramatically. And it makes me mad that I lost 6 to 7 years of my life to this pain of missing out on work. I'm missing out on activities with my kids, miss out money. I'm like the primary, I'm a solo parent. So, like, when you start impacting my money because, healthcare professionals don't believe women, like, that's a huge issue for me. It impacts family and impacts children. It's a negative for all of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, something that I think about is when I think about patriarchy in healthcare, it's that it's also related to money. So, like, the fields that women are very prevalent in tend to be really undervalued. So, when I think about the CNAs, social workers, nurses, and what they get paid in comparison to doctors. And if you look at, like, the American Medical Association, the board there is mostly male. Whereas compared to the board for the other healthcare professionals, it looks a little more diverse. And we talk about the wage gap between fields that are typically dominated by men versus fields that are typically dominated by women, and you see that there. So it's just like the power dynamics play out on so many different levels. It's just baffling. Raven, I'm amazed that you did what you did. How did you find the strength to put yourself out there like that?
Well, again, when it starts impacting your ability to work and survive, and, I'm so focused on creating this good life for my babies that I just had to keep trying. Another thing that helped is my best friend, Becca, she is trans. And so she was socialized and viewed as male for a good majority of her life. So a lot of the times I would vent to Becca about what was going on with me. And she was floored because if she, for example, goes in and says, hey, I think I have these symptoms for this, the doctor will be like, oh, okay, yeah, you probably do. Here, let's try a script. Or, oh, here, let's refer you to a specialist right away. Like, she's never gotten questioned in that same way. And so we started comparing comparing notes, and it floored me. And honestly, I had seen it with male partners that I had dated in the past too. And so for me, I just realized, like, if I'm not advocating and standing up and trying to move the needle here, this work is just going to keep passing down to our children and our children's children. So I don't know. I guess I was a little stubborn.
Well, good for you for having that stubbornness. And, I can, um, it, it, it floored me in one instance a couple years back, just having a general meeting with my department. And we have a collection of educators, registered dietitians, RNs, LVNs, all the like. And behaviorists too. And one particular registered nurse, and I know a lot of it stemmed from her, belief and everything, but it floored me because I know her compassion as far as the kind of care she exudes. It's more case management level in my department. And that's what I mainly work with and do as far as myself. But, having had worked with this individual and knowing how she, interacts over the phone or virtually or in person with members when she's trying to convey, health education or whatever it is that she's doing as far as their health needs. I admired that up until I had made note and reference of a particular patient that was enrolled into one of our surgery programs. They go through an education class before being seen by a surgeon. And they had identified themselves as she, her. But on the reflection of the, I guess you could say, roster, she still had, she's had a feminine name, I guess you could say, to say the least, but her physical appearance did not exude femininity, obviously, to that person. So the nurse, unfortunately, kept attributing her with the wrong pronouns. And the patient, unfortunately, felt that it was at times purposeful when she strived to correct her often. And sometimes, we're humans, we make mistakes and we try to correct ourselves and move forward and try not to make those same mistakes again, especially when you're trying to pay respect to someone. And especially when a patient is, there to seek help, information, and care. But ultimately, she felt so uncomfortable that she removed herself from the program because of the fact that the interaction with the educator was not well. And one particular nurse made a comment saying, well, how does a person not know who they are? And that floored me. And, to think that, with the culture of respecting people's identity and respecting how they would be addressed, just as myself, they, them, he, her, anyone would like to in any situation. I find it very unsettling as a healthcare professional amongst other healthcare people to hear them say things like that, and with such dismissiveness and no empathy at all, which motivated me to change a workflow within our department where, if a person identifies as a particular way, it is listed on the attendance roster for in-person classes or virtual classes. So they know how to appropriately address that patient so that mistake won't happen again. And I am grateful that myself and another coworker helped moved that needle and established that within our department.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No,
I was just gonna say that, that's so important. I've had to try to educate healthcare professionals too on this issue. And sometimes I educate from the perspective of, like, do you know the facts? Like, do you know that mispronouncing and misgendering somebody and using a dead name increases likelihood of self-harm and suicide, right? By more than 40%. It's you're literally saving lives when you just value and accept people for who they are at that time.
Exactly.
And trans people and non-binary people, we don't owe you femininity, masculinity, or androgyny, right? It's really not that hard when you just get down to the meat and potatoes of it. Treat people how they want to be treated. So I'm really glad you worked on that flow. I have several trans friends who have been impacted by nurses, like you mentioned, in the healthcare industry. And, one had gone into the psych ward because she was suicidal and had this happen to her um, by a nurse within that department, which of course is the exact opposite of the help that she came there to receive, right? It was actively causing harm, which is against, the oath y'all take. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. There's a lot of, patriarchy, obviously, misogyny, transphobia, and racism within the healthcare system, and they intersect. I know we're talking about patriarchy in healthcare right now, but I end up talking in my classes a lot about racism within the healthcare system and its impacts as well, too, and the outcomes. So, yeah.
Absolutely. No, you're right. Absolutely. They do intersect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's always really important to be aware of too, because often my experience just being on the other side, working as a nurse, often the more of those intersections you identify with, as far as gender and race and all of those things, even so far as what diagnosis you might have, kind of each one of those decreases the likelihood that you are even going to be listened to. Some of the research I was doing for the show, the National LGBTQ Task Force found 50% of people who responded to their surveys have had to teach their doctors about how to properly care for trans people. So it's a very, very widespread problem.
Heavily so. And, I know all of us are familiar with Dr. Ben. Like I look forward to, I secretly want to be his nurse, by the way, but I look forward to him being involved and many others like him being involved and knowing and understanding those intricate importances, because before you can even relay any type of healthcare, before anything that is vital to their care, vital to their health can be even mentioned, just appropriately dressing that person, showing that respect sets the stage. And if that's not met, then everything else just flies out the window automatically. And then they are met with this trauma and struggle of, okay, if I try to find another provider, am I going to be met with that same type of response? And that's how so many people just struggle with getting the appropriate care they need, because even for women, that it's so many, just for women to go to a male doctor and feeling that they're being judged. And like you had mentioned, Raven, because of weight. And that's obviously, I work in a health education department focusing on bariatric surgery. So a majority of my patients that I help enroll and refer are women. And a lot of, what they mention besides, joint arthritis issues or as a need to lose weight is, my doctor so-and-so said I needed it because I do. Like someone told you, and I look to see who the doctor is, and 9 times out of 10, it's a male, or because I know it's a male because I either have actively worked with them or I know them personally. And, just to have someone just say that you need this because you need this, and not helping them make that choice, or providing other avenues, but it's almost like you're degrading them in that instance. Like they're already coming to you feeling vulnerable, feeling however they feel in that moment, or maybe they're just simply happy at where they are and they feel healthy and they feel fine and they're happy, and then they're hit with that, you need this because obviously you need it.
Yeah.
Too many times I've ran into that. Yeah.
It sounds like it's really about like a hierarchy, right? Of like somebody who feels like they have power, saying like, this is your problem here. So it's not listening to the patient or listening to the person in front of you, so much as it is assigning values to people based on race or gender or weight, or like spirituality and religious status also comes into it. So I think of across all of the medical fields, there's emphasis on spirituality assessment. And so part of what I've been trying to do in my work is offer a training in unpacking spirituality, because often when we approach people from, or when medical professionals approach people, what I've seen is if those folks don't identify as religious or spiritual, especially in hospice, medical staff don't know what to do with that, and then they back off and they ignore needs about connection and coping and relationships because they're like, oh, they're not spiritual, so I don't know how to approach all those issues because spirituality is the language that I speak about those things in. So I'm trying to like offer trainings for medical folks to unpack that and say, like, what are you talking about when you're talking about spirituality? Because you need to be talking about whatever you're talking about from the language of the patient or the person in front of you.
Yes.
And that's been challenging so far. It was made it really difficult to work in hospice as a non-religious person and advocate for non-religious patients and clients. I remember being in a treatment team meeting on one point, and like somebody was talking about a patient suffering, and the nurse was like, well, I reassured them that, God just was not ready to call him home yet. And I was like, I really hope that you did not say that to that person, because culturally, that's not where they're coming from.
Right.
And she chewed me out after that meeting. She was like, why'd you have to say that to me? And I was like, I said it to you because patient care. That's what we're here for. We're here for patient care. But I do think that like it's such an easy overreach when you're centering your own culture and you're not going to the patient. Yeah.
And I think there's often this conflation that happens with people assume like well, I'll say Christianity because it's, so like mainstream or whatever, common, they conflate like spirituality with being religious. And if you're not religious, then you must not also be spiritual. And there's just so many things outside the bubble of like religious that still fall into the realm of spirituality, so.
Yeah. It's far too often. I won't say far too often, but I have seen instances, especially with someone I know that's within our department that is, a Christian religious, and he is a behavioral therapist, so he does these one-on-ones with our potential bariatric patients so they can understand the potential behavioral psychological determinants or changes that may occur post-surgery, like changes in addiction or addiction management, you relinquishing food for another thing, or make sure you're having that social structure or network or support. And when not that I've sat into any of his visits, but I overheard and he has mentioned having to direct the conversation to talk about their faith. And that obviously was a huge overreach, because not only are you trying to, that's a little bit, well, frankly, I just think that was completely unnecessary, to just want to strive to pull that out of a person, whether they believed or not, but also to, implement your own in that current situation. And they could have been from a whole different, completely different belief system. So you're overstepping yourself as a Christian to implement yourself into a person that is Muslim or Hindu or none. And I wonder also if that is also a component of him being male and most of these patients being female, for him to, try to pull some type of emotional response, because, women are classically supposed to be emotional creatures, and that's our downfall, and this, that, and whatever. So it's there's so many components to that just does not sit with me well.
There are a lot of components to that, but I think part of that is that spiritual assessment is part of the standard of care across all of them. And sometimes people don't know that. So I've had conversations with got lots of non-religious friends, imagine that. So sometimes they're like, why do people ask about religious background? And I was like, well, spiritual assessment is taught to nurses, doctors, social workers, etc. And so people are asking you that question because they're trying to meet the requirements of their role without fully understanding what it means to do a spiritual assessment. Because if I think that spirituality and religion are the same thing, or I don't know how to talk to people using inclusive language, then those questions make sense, and they can make things really awkward for no real reason at all. So, yeah.
We've just seen too on a nationwide level, stepping still in line with the spirituality discussion here, how religion plus men in power equals oppression of women, especially in healthcare, right? So here, I mean, the oppression is on a federal government level for women in healthcare at this moment. And that's something that just continues to be perpetuated. You know, it was bad enough, the harm is bad enough that the research studies done for most medicine that we use, or standards we use, like the BMI, were all based on men, and like
Oh
real freaking
gosh,
old men back in the day, right? But
that is
yet,
my
like,
biggest struggle. I'm so
as
glad
a
you said that.
female, you know, when I was socialized as a female, and the BMI was the marker of my worth, right? And that misogyny, that patriarchy, the would you be attracted to the male gaze as the sole indicator of health is so damaging to our women and, you know, non-binary AFAB people in this country. It's completely toxic. It's something I actively have to teach against in my household with my young daughters. We talk about how, you know, there's health at every size and all bodies are supposed to look different, and we want to make sure that we're feeding our body what it needs to eat, and we're moving in ways that bring us joy. And, you know, that is health. And the doctor can fix some stuff maybe I haven't figured out, but at some point you're going to come across diet culture and it's geared towards you because we're in a patriarchal society. And it's about consumerism and capitalism because they want to make you feel bad. So you purchase more things. Like, think how large the diet industry is, the medical field industry, and the different, you know, it's brought into whether or not a medicine is even marketed for men or women. Like, if you look at Viagra studies, they found it had an awesome use for women, I believe, in heart conditions. But they
Yeah,
realized capitalizing it as, like, can I say, a dick pill, right, for men was going to make them a lot more money. So that's the
much more
route they went with
profitable.
the marketing, right? When it could have a benefit to women in our country. And that's just part of the system. And then you run into folks that have that internalized misogyny, that internalized patriarchy. So, you know, it's a female doctor or a nurse or whatever, but they're perpetuating this because it's so internalized, right? They're acting it out still. I ran into that a lot when I chose not to have male providers and instead actively sought out female providers, but still got the dismissiveness, still got the, you know, oh, I don't believe you, it couldn't possibly be like this, etc. And honestly, like, I'm lighter skinned now. I was darker as a kid. Like, it could be related to racism. Indigenous and Black women in my state of Minnesota have much worse, very disparate health outcomes as compared to their white peers when it comes to our healthcare system. So there's racism aspects here too, tucked inside of the misogyny and the patriarchy.
Well, and two, I think a lot of it's the paternalism, right? It's the, well, you couldn't possibly know actually what's best for you or what's actually going on with you, and I'm the man, I'm the person in the position of authority, so I can speak to what's going on with you even though I haven't personally experienced it, and I'm going to tell you what is actually going on with you. And it's rampant in healthcare for sure, but, you know, we find it in a lot of other aspects of society too.
Oh, absolutely. It's only but in very recent years, like in 1993, when like the NIH, National Institute of Health, finally got a female board member, or I think she was a commissioner or leader. I forget the actual term, but it wasn't until 1993 that, you know, over the course of American history, we finally made it a requirement to have research studies to involve women and not just men. How many years have we done studies on medications that we use that are very common now that have only been researched and tested by men and not known to how it would affect women? And how, you know, the birth control was once for men, and they had adverse reactions and complained about it and then reverted it onto us. So, how many years of just here in America's history, just doing clinical researches just on men alone, and not but until 1993. That's like, I was born in 1990, so that's not but a few years younger than myself, to where we finally made that a requirement to make sure women are required within every kind of study in health. And so much of health studies, especially dealing with cardiology, because number one heart disease is for women. That's the number one killer for us. So much so centered around, it's the only thing that we have done enough, or still not enough, but is around reproductive. Us being baby makers is the reason as to why at some points in history where research was even at least a bit curious about women.
And even then, they didn't always bother getting consent first. Like the original trials for birth control, I believe, were like the women weren't even told what they were taking.
Nope.
And of course, there's that awful history of gynecology, and using people who couldn't refuse. So then with slavery and not even bothering to use any kind of anesthetic, which is absolutely horrifying.
Or having resident doctors come in while a woman is under anesthesia for a different procedure and do a pelvic exam, without consent. Like that's a huge issue too. Can you imagine if we started doing that to men? There'd be an uproar.
Or the husband stitch, right?
Yes, right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't possibly make this decision without your husband present. Or the language would be, oh, you can't possibly just want to remove your eggs. Don't you want to have babies? Don't you want to be pregnant? Like, no, that's not my fucking duty. Excuse me.
Right.
But,
or that you'll change your mind bullshit.
Yeah.
Oh, you'll change your mind. You're too young. Give it another 10 years. You're going to want to pop out some kids. Like,
wow.
Nah, I can speak for my own body. The biggest thing I teach my kids is your body, your choice, right? And I wish I could teach everyone that. Body autonomy, believing people, it's important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And and we only afford autonomy to, certain intersections of people. And sort of the more, like we were talking about the intersectionality earlier, like the more intersections you have, sort of the more ways they find to chip away at the autonomy. Right, we have a question in the comments. What's your advice on a changing career to healthcare? Would you recommend it? Oh,
hell yes, Esther.
I think we need a lot more qualified people who have
diverse, qualified, all of that.
Absolutely, those experiences in healthcare. And honestly, right now, like, it's sort of, I think we're almost with a pandemic. It's sort of shown us a lot of the flaws in our healthcare system, and perhaps in recovery we can start to take some measures to correct some of those.
Yes. Yes.
We'll have to put in the work to do that. But yeah, we absolutely need a lot of voices, diverse voices and experiences in healthcare, because the less I can't think of the less white and male it is, probably the better for everybody.
We get it. You can be blunt. Yeah, and I understand. But it's true. It's very, very true. The less of them and the more of everyone else, so everyone can see themselves and feel comfortable and feel okay to have a female requested or male requestment or trans. All of that dynamic is important, so that not only patients can receive the appropriate care that they need, but they can actually be heard and understood. And it's not a fight to actually teach that MD what the hell I'm going through.
Right. Well,
or
I mean,
you
imagine
shouldn't feel me. Yeah.
Yeah. Imagine how much more comfortable like a trans person would be going to see a doctor, and the doctor is like, I am also trans. That would probably they would save so much on
That's
like
powerful.
introductory comments even.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
Can I ask a
I
question
think,
of the healthcare providers?
yeah.
Okay, so I have seen this as a patient, and I'm just wondering if I'm like projecting onto it. But it seems to me when I have a male doctor versus a female doctor, and nurses are running around and helping, doing a lot, the biggest lift, right? I always feel like it's always less work, it appears, for the nurse when it's a female doctor versus when it's a male doctor. Like, I can't tell you how many times it's reminded me of like a 1950s household dynamic where it seems like the lift of the care is being handled by the women in the healthcare setting, and then the male just sort of flits in for a second, like gives their godly opinion, and then like flits out. I've had a couple circumstances where I was just like, what on earth? But again, I'm not on the other side. But has that been a pattern or something that you do see as part of patriarchy in healthcare as a provider?
So anecdotally, yes, Raven, but also doctors are socialized like the rest of us are socialized, right? So a doctor who is a fab, I'm sure, is doing a lot of emotional labor all day long in all of her roles. And so we don't stop, like we don't shed that socialization when we walk into the room as a healthcare provider, you know? So
Yeah, that's
that's
so
my thinking
sad.
is like,
Yeah.
yeah, anecdotally, I do see that too, but I also think like part of that is who the doctor is, whether a male doctor and a female doctor, and like how they are, or if they're a non-binary person and they're socialized based on how they're assigned growing up. Um, we don't get to drop that, unfortunately, all of our expectations of ourselves and other people and relationships when we walk in the room. I wish we did. I wish we'd be like, yep, we're all like
Yeah.
level playing field, but it's so ingrained. And I heard you say earlier, like about internalized oppression. I feel like we all walk around with internalized oppression all the time. So I try to hold that stuff really like super compassionately with myself, because sometimes I have a thought and I'm like, well, shit, that's like not what I want for myself at all. But I've got all
Absolutely.
sorts of ingrained judgments that are based in the like sewage that we are swimming in all day long. you know?
No, I know for me, it's I've seen both. To be frank, uh, there have been instances where like Helen was saying, they're very socialized and what their upbringing was, or where they went to school, even, or where they hail from, and they bring that to the workplace, and they just exude that, and they may come off as very flippant, or they just give their grandiose opinion and walk out the room and let the nurse say, okay, do this, let me know. Book them, see them in 2 weeks or whatever. And so I've worked with people like that, both male and female, and I've also just, sometimes it's just, you just stare at a doctor or a nurse or any kind of medical professional. It's just like, why are you in this career? You're just a dick all around. Why do you do this? And it's hard to judge. It's hard to know uh, those differences sometimes, and maybe it's a bit more obvious than not. But sometimes I've seen it on both sides. As a patient, I've seen that in this particular doctor. And I hate to pull my, oh, I work for the same organization you're working right now, sir, card, but I often maybe sometimes have to do that just so that they can at least look at me and take me seriously. Weird, right? So, I've never met this doctor before. They don't know me. I never worked with them. So, they come in. I had whatever kind of complication or complaint at that time, and they just didn't want to prescribe me anything. They were just saying, well, maybe it's this, or maybe you're working too much, or maybe it's blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, I know what this is. And I just need you to listen and hear what I'm telling you. And I'm like, wow, this guy is an asshole. And I just, in order for me to advocate for myself and get what I know, what I was struggling with to happen, I had to pretty much say, hey, I work here, blah, blah, blah. Can you at least give me better direction or another specialist in this particular department in which I know such and such person that they can, tell me something else or get a second opinion. And then they wanted to start to care. And, and lucky for me, I had that privilege, but who else does? Oftentimes you don't. I feel sometimes disgusted in myself when I have to pull that card just for me to receive the care that I want. But what can you do? You get desperate. And that's that. Why would you have to feel like you have to get desperate in order to be heard?
Yeah, that sucks. To be really eloquent, be like, that's really crappy, Jenna. I'm sorry. Super sorry.
It fucking sucks.
But Afro-humanist just commented, and I wanted to say to you, the Afro-humanist, that the question about whether you should be in healthcare, I just want to be really transparent about that question. So I think that representation matters. So if you are motivated by that, yes, do it. But know that representation matters, and the leadership, there's not a lot of representation in leadership. So part of it is to be mindful of how much emotional labor are you wanting to take on when you make steps in your career. And I try to be a person-centered, humanist, feminist therapist, right? So I just want to be be mindful of your own boundaries and how much work it is to be in an environment. If you are motivated to make change and show up and know that it's not going to be easy, come join us. But know that it's not going to be easy. So.
That's so true. It's not. Sometimes, just thinking of what you just said, Helen, sometimes I have to think about that just with work now. There's too often times where my office mate, who is a man, hardcore Christian, young dude, idiot, that I can't for the life of me understand why he became a nurse. But there are things and situations that have occurred within our more subgroup of the department that I just sit back and I'm like, if I did that, I would be fired. Yet you just got away with that. And it can be as serious as, not documenting appropriately or not documenting at all on a patient's chart.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely, it's, of course, in any workplace, there's all the different sort of dynamics that contribute to how a person is treated and how much they're listened to. And it goes for employees as much as it does for the patients, unfortunately. And I've been thinking about, because there's sort of this definite hierarchy in healthcare, right? There shouldn't be, because it's supposed to be a team approach and everybody has a different role that they fill. But in the real world, in practicality, you've got the doctors at the top, right? And then how many times have we made I'm just a nurse jokes, right? And then there's, so all of those things also contribute. We were discussing the gender sort of expectations within the healthcare system. And if there's differences in male doctors versus female doctors. And there's also that internalized misogyny, I think, because I've definitely had good experiences and bad experiences with both, as far as being receptive to requests and things like that. And often I work off shifts, so I'm not working necessarily with the head providers, just who's on call and who, and you're paging and stuff, and it's not as much direct interaction. And I'm also thinking about, well, how much do our expectations of how a femme appearing or woman identifying doctor should behave, if she's being brusque with me or she's not giving me what I want or addressing, am I judging her more harshly than I would a male doctor because she's a woman? So
that's a good point.
definitely important, I think, in any profession where you're kind of working with people in a caretaking profession, to also kind of keep it on your radar as to what your thoughts are about what's going on in the situation, how much of that might be some of your internalized stuff too.
Yeah,
No, very good point.
it is a good point. I also think of like, I wish that I had statistics, and I don't, but it appears that cisgender men seem to advance faster in their careers in medical settings than do anyone else. And I really wish I had statistics to back that up, but anecdotally, that's what I have observed is like, there seems to be a lot of like looking up to by virtue of gender, which is a little bizarre. Doesn't mean that you're more informed. But, yeah.
I think there's a lot of imposed barriers too for women to advance as fast in their careers. I mean, if we look at not having paid parental leave when you have a child, having a baby is scary and can be, deadly. And so there's a lot of impacts. You could have a pregnancy that takes you out of the workforce for a while. You could, need to stay with your immunocompromised baby at home, and that just derails your career. And it's not supposed to be taken as a negative when you're looking for advancement, but I have historically found that it always is taken as a negative, right? So I think with the burden, just the patriarchy within our homes and our social systems too, it almost has its own form of withholding women from being able to advance, being, graded and judged on things that we're not given a choice on, being the ones to do, right? Having the baby, going through the pregnancy and afterwards.
Yeah, and then women that do are often pretty alone in being in those upper levels. So there's isolation with advancement. I'd seen that there was a question, but I didn't.
Yeah, that it's if anyone, do we think that America could ever get to a similar point to the UK with single payer healthcare, mostly free and just a prescription chart? God, I dream of it. I honestly do. Like our current system with insurance is probably, I think, the number one barrier to healthcare in this country right now. So I don't want to say no, because I really, really want that for us. However, there are definitely a lot of barriers to that. I mean, corporations have such pull, and I know that's one reason why they don't want universal health care, because employer-provided health care they use that as a huge, huge bargaining chip for keeping workers and not treating them well. There are a lot of people who hate their jobs, wouldn't work at those jobs, but they need the healthcare insurance. They need the insurance that their job provides, and if they left the job, they would lose that. There's a lot of factors, and the insurance system right now is such a mess. It would improve things so much, but I think it'd be a heavy lift. I've definitely had people tell me that it could never happen here, but I don't want to believe that. I would love to believe someday get there.
No, I'm with you, Charlotte.
Need to get to. Oh, yep. Go ahead, Jenna.
Oh no, go ahead. No, you're
I was just going to say we got to get to the point where we value people more than money. Right. And that's a big ask of a country that was built on the genocide of the indigenous people and the enslavement of African people. We still have those historical systemic racism institutions, policies, and procedures in place. We have a lot of work to do to really turn the tide on valuing human life. Those of us that are actually living, walking through this world, and not just who we throw religion on to control female bodies, right? So.
Yeah, people overthink.
I have no idea what you're relating to. No idea.
I wasn't sure how far off we wanted to go from patriarchy. I mean, it is patriarchy.
It's all patriarchy.
An absence of bodily autonomy based on somebody else's religion. That sounds like patriarchy to me.
That's huge. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm with you, and to more to your point, Charlotte, I'm with what you said as far as Same with, I don't want to say no. I don't. But health insurance here, and I am a very fortunate person with my employer. My coverage, I don't pay anything. I hardly pay anything, very little out of pocket. I don't pay for insurance. I don't know what that feels or looks like. Like my paycheck is what it is, and it's fully covered by who I work for. If anything, my medications are but maybe $5 or $10, depending on what it is. And I'm fortunate in that. Not a lot of people are. And I am one of those people that say I love my employee benefited health coverage. But I know with the organization I work for, as far as care for weight management, women's health, and with mental health, horrible. It is, especially mental health. It is very, very, and why the heck there is this dramatic separation between healthcare and mental health will never make sense to me. And that should never, ever be a separation, because just like everything else, they intersect. You can mentally go through something that physically tears you apart. They intersect closely. And the mental health care, even for me, even though I know I could pay maybe as much as $5 or nothing for a consultation or as many follow-ups as I need or scan or whatever under that mental health department, I refuse to go, because who they stick me with, first of all, takes forever still. And a lot of times when I have gone through that department, they're this overly spiritual person that says, find your inner spirit, blah blah. I don't know where they find these people, but it's like I rather go outside of my coverage and pay so many hundreds of dollars just because I refuse to go through my employer's coverage because it's so bad.
Yeah.
So
Oof.
bad.
It breaks my heart when I hear you talk about your experiences with mental health professionals. I'm like, oh.
I know. I apologize. I know.
That's okay.
I know.
I mean, it's not me personally, but geez, my people, come on.
Yeah. And oftentimes it's not even the licensed social worker like you or other behaviorists. It's not even you. It's the actual business aspect, the overhead. How much money they want to contribute to make this function or open up more spots to hire more people, so the availability is much quicker or more open to a huge population. Because I live in California. I work in Orange County, one of the biggest counties next to LA that we have in the state. And our department itself is so small to cover this huge swath of diverse people. And our heaviest populated individuals are Latino, Hispanic Americans. And, even trying to get a freaking translator is a detriment.
Yeah. Oof.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as like the paying for mental health and the insurance piece goes, it is really, so I am one of those therapists that people pay out of pocket because it is very, very difficult as an individual. Like, I run my own business, a solo practitioner, and I started my business taking insurance. But then if I made an error on anything, which sometimes as a person I do, I would be on hold for 3 hours, getting passed around, being patched through to somebody else who was like, no, I can't answer that question for you. Let me patch you through to somebody else. So I left insurance panels because I was like, I am a person with ADHD. I cannot like figure out a spreadsheet of figuring out when I'm getting paid for a service I provided a month and a half ago, and then talk to 5 freaking people to try to get it resolved while I'm not being paid in the interim. So for individual practitioners, some people are like, nope, I'm a genius at paperwork and organization. It's all flowing for me. More power to you. But for people that are sometimes imperfect, working with insurance is a freaking nightmare. And my perspective is biased, whatever. It's based on my experience, but I think it's set up that way. Insurance companies are about making money for insurance companies because they're businesses. And it's very hard for individuals who are mental health practitioners to like be in business with insurance companies. It just, sucks. It's hard.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I
It's
mean,
hard when you have to be both a therapist and also the money person too, because at one
Yeah.
point do you then not see your patient because they have too high of a bill racked up that they're not able and on I I've been going to therapy forever, and I remember with one circumstance insurance messed something up and they wanted like $1,000 from me. I'm like, well, I don't have like 1K just sitting around. And so the way their policy worked is then I couldn't see my therapist until that had been rectified with insurance, and then everything was paid up. And so having that model not only is hard for the therapist, but it's also hard for the patient, who oftentimes, well, it's mental health care, right? Like that person's not in the best place to manage any of that potentially,
mhm.
right? And can we talk about how hard it is to get an ADHD diagnosis when you're not a cis male?
Mm.
Like,
I went through that
ridiculous.
2 months ago.
Oh, I'm still going through it. I saw Jim Bro, like legit had the protein powder shake, the buff
You
arms,
said
and the
it,
gym
Jim, bro.
bag. Totally. Yeah. He just said I just need to do stuff. It's okay. I just tell my clients to eat the frog. Just do the thing you don't want to do. I was like, thanks. So, now I'm trying to seek out a different assessment with somebody who is educated in, AFAB folks, and how ADHD shows up differently for us when we're socialized to mask really hard.
Mhm.
So that's been
Yeah.
interesting on TikTok too, all the late diagnoses for women with ADHD and autism, because it's just dismissed completely in
Look how
healthcare.
it right, but look how it started. When it was referred to as ADD, it was always referenced as little boys having bad behaviors. Little boys.
Yes, yes, it was. Yep.
It was a behavior thing, and now we learn better. It's not behavioral, it's more psychological. But
Hmm.
we still have not progressed in identifying, understanding, and studying that, and what the underlying differences that women experience. Like hell, even the same thing is for myocardial infarctions, heart attacks. The symptoms that men feel when they're actively or potentially about to have a heart attack are dramatically different for women. And we still can't, sufficiently identify that, test for that, or understand or be sensitive to have that knowledge. Most practitioners to, see that or catch that. That's why I would assume that's why heart disease is so number one high with women in the US. It makes sense if that's the case. But yeah, for me, 2-3 months ago, thinking that, trying to understand what my psychological issues are, because I know for a stint I went and saw someone several years back, and I came out diagnosed with mixed mood disorder and depression. And I'm still untreated. I haven't been medicated or anything, and I still am striving to be seen by someone, but it takes so effing long, and then life freaking happens, and then this is more important, and then you have to take care of this. And I'm an unmarried, I don't have children, but I'm busy, I work, and the long waits just keep happening. So it's suddenly you can't get the attention or care that you deserve at that time, and then you kind of just get, and I'm sure maybe you felt this, Raven, you just kind of get discouraged, and you're like, well, I'll just move on, I'll just handle that another time, or
Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I'm 40 and I was diagnosed with ADHD this year. So there's that.
wow.
Pass me your doctor. Yeah, I think the pandemic and
Wow.
TikTok was a revolution in health and mental health care for AFAB people and women in particular, because I was like, oh my God, why is this everything that I do? And then so many TikTokers have that story. I watched
Hmm.
ADHD TikTok and all the hacks work for me and all the symptoms are me, but I thought I was the only one. Because we don't get education around this stuff. We're not screened proactively for it.
Mhm.
But there's just not enough knowledge because of how healthcare has been set up historically to be geared towards and serve men.
Yeah.
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 Well, I'm looking at the clock, and it's looking like we're actually running out of time. So I'm really, really glad that you all could join me today. And this was such a great conversation. We could probably talk about this for a lot longer. I think there's a lot of ground to cover with this particular topic. But we're going to have to probably say goodnight for now. And just remember, whether it's my kind or your kind, we're all humankind, so don't forget to be kind.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that, spitting slow, spitting fast. I could roast, I could gas, think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past. And the pettiness, a reflection of the emptiness.